Hello guys, welcome to the Citizenship YouTube channel. In today's series of our biology discussion, we'll be talking about living and non-living things. While you are here, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this video to your friends too. Biology, as we know, is the study of life. So, living and non-living things tends to form the basis of biology. What are living things? Living things are anything that have life in them. Example, plants and animals. While non-living things are anything that don't have life in them. For example, gases, some solids, like our chair, and some liquids like our water. Living and non-living things, they tend to interrelate in the environment. The non-living thing, like the gases, example CO2, it helps to provide the precursors that the plants use in photosynthesis. Plants, on the other hand, they now generate the food that is being used in the ecosystem, which the animal depend on to feed on. Plants and animal, they live and they die. So once they die, their remains tend to decay, decompose, and go back to the realm of non-living things. So living and non-living things, they live in an interrelationship. We have a group of organisms called the viruses. The viruses is a gap between living and non-living thing. You cannot say that the virus is a total living thing or a non-living thing because they have the features of both living and non-living thing. The viruses has the RNA and the DNA strand that helps in reproduction, but viruses, they can only reproduce when they are being found in the host cell. So the definition I gave you about living thing, it is not so encompassing because for you to say that an organism is a living thing, there are a few characteristics that the organism must possess. And these characteristics have an acronym called Mr. Niger D. Mr. Niger D is an acronym used to remember the features of a living thing. And before you can say that an organism is a living thing, the organism must have some of these features. We'll start with letter M. Letter M stands for movement. Living things tend to move from place to place. The animals, for example, they move from place to place in search for food. They move from place to place in search for shelter. Also, the plant, which is also a living organism, tends to move. The shoots and the branches and some part of the roots also tend to move in their environment. Secondly, we have letter R. Letter R stands for respiration. Respiration is the ability of living organisms to take in oxygen and to breathe out carbon dioxide. This process is very important because it forms the major pathway in which this living organism gets their energy. So living organisms tends to respire. N stands for nutrition. This is the ability of living organisms to feed. This nutrition is very important because by so doing, this living organism can get the nutrients used to replenish worn out cells or used to make the cells to grow. We have I. I stands for irritability. So irritability is the ability of an organism to respond to this stimulus. This stimulus can be of a good type or a bad type. If it's a bad type, that's the one that can harm the living organism. They tend to flee or they tend to move away from this stimulus. So both plants and animal, which are the called living things, they tend to respond to stimulus that's changing in the environment. We have our letter G, which stands for growth. Living organisms tend to grow also. Growth is the irreversible increase in size and also in development of a living organism. So both plants and animal, they tend to grow. In animal, their growth is limited, while in plants, their growth is unlimited. We have E, which stands for excretion. Like I told you earlier, we have our letter N here, which stands for nutrition. So most times when living organisms feed, this food that we ingest tends to become toxic in our body after metabolism. So there is need for excretion. Excretion is the removal of waste products from the body. Waste products can be from metabolism. So if you don't tend to excrete from your body tends to accumulate toxic substances that can lead to acidosis or alkalosis. So after E, our next letter here is R. R stands for reproduction. R stands for reproduction. Reproduction is very important for the continuity of life. So this is a process by which living organisms, they tend to reproduce their own kind for the continuity of their generation. So we have here D. Our letter D stands for death. All living organisms are alive, and once they are alive, they must age, and once they age, they also come to die. So This death is the terminal point that this living organism ceases to exist. So that's letter D, which stands for death. Also, apart from Mr. Niger D, there are another two major features that a living organism must possess. Those two main features is what I call AH. So our acronym is going to change to Mr. Niger DAH or Mr. Niger DA. So these two new words, A stands for adaptation and H stands for homeostasis. A stands for adaptation. Adaptation is the ability of a living organism to familiarize itself with the environment. This is the ability of the living organism to communicate and interact with its environs. That's adaptation. So H stands for homeostasis. Homeostasis is very, very important because this is the ability of living organism to maintain a constant internal environment. This is the ability of the living organism to make sure that the internal environment is in equilibrium, that the body is in equilibrium. So that's the last feature of a living organism. Let's move on to the next phase, which is the difference between a living and a non-living thing. The differences. So number one striking difference between a living and a non-living thing is life. Living organisms have life in them, while non-living things do not have life in them. That's number one difference. Number two difference is growth. Our second difference is growth. Living organisms, they grow by assimilation of nutrients, and this growth is brought about by the irreversible increase in size and in development. While non-living things, they don't grow by assimilation. Even if they grow at all, they grow by depositions of matter on their surface, and this deposition is still reversible. Our third point is death. Living organisms, they live and they die. They live, they age, and they die. While the non-living organisms, they don't die because they don't have life in them. Our fourth point is movement. Living organisms, they tend to move from place to place, maybe in search for food or to flee for safety. While non-living things, they don't move at all. Okay, so our fifth point is the double R, reproduction and respiration. Living things, they tend to reproduce and they tend to also respire. While the non-living things, they don't reproduce and they don't respire. So these are some of the differences that you can see between a living thing and a non-living thing. Also, the living thing and the non-living thing, they have some few similarities that exist between the both. Number one similarity is that both living thing and non-living thing, they have weight. Secondly, both living thing and non-living must possess size. So these are the two major similarities that you can get between a living thing and a non-living thing. So lastly, before we call it a wrap, we're going to also look at the differences between a plant and an animal, because that forms the major population of the whole world. Plants and animal, which are the types of the living thing. So we are going to differentiate between these two both class of living things. Okay, so our first difference between plant and animal is the ability to manufacture their own food. So if you come to the plants have chlorophylls. These chlorophylls tend to help the plant to manufacture their own food. While the animals, they can't make their own food on their own. They solely depend on the plant for food production. Our second difference is the issue of locomotion. Animals have organs of locomotion that can take that aid them to move from place to place in search for food. While plants, they don't have organs for locomotion. Our third difference is the sense organs. The plant does not have specialized sense organs, while the animals have some specialized sense organs that help them to detect a change in stimuli or change in their external environment. Our fourth difference is the issue of growth. In the plants, their growth is indefinite, while in the animals, their growth is limited. So growth here is unlimited or indefinite, while growth in animals is limited. So our last difference is the way they store their food. In plants, food is stored as starch, while in animals, their food is stored as glycogen. So these are the striking difference between the plants and the animal. So before we call it a wrap, we are going to solve some live past questions to test what we have learned in today's tutorial. Okay guys, so I'm with our past question here. So this is JAMB past question 2009. The question says, a feature exhibited by all living things is A, sexual reproduction, B, aerobic respiration, C, ability to move from place to place, D, ability to remove unwanted substances. Our answer is D, because all living organisms must excrete. Not all living organisms can sexually reproduce. Not all of them can do aerobic respiration. Not all of them can move from place to place, but all of them can excrete. So our correct option is number D, the ability to what? Remove unwanted substances. Okay, this is also JAMB past question in 2008 biology. It says a characteristic that can possibly be shared by both living and non-living organisms is number 1, locomotion, number 2, irritability, C, increase in biomass, and number 4, increase in size. So our answer here is increase in biomass, because both the living thing and non-living thing, they can increase in their biomass. So this is JAMB question in 1994. It says the smallest living organism which share the characteristics of both living and non-living matter are A, bacteria, B, fungi, C, virus, D, protozoa. So the answer is virus. Like I told you earlier, it forms a gap between living thing and non-living thing. So lastly, we also have a JAMB question in 1979. It says all living organisms dash A, photosynthesize, B, respire, C, move, D, feed, E, transpire. So the answer is respiration, because for you to be a living organism, you must respire. That's taking in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. So that's a wrap, guys. I hope by the end of this tutorial, you have known what a living and non-living thing are and their differences, and with their follow examples. So if you have any question of any type, let me know in the comment section. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification button also. For now, bye bye.